Uneducated, unfiltered, unhinged. This is the Mangina Dialogues. We at it again with your host Nick Scopes and the Gregolicious. You know how we do, cause you know we keeping it gangster and silly. Unplugged like a full swung titty. Bout get jitty, cause you know we down to the nitty and the gritty. And we make shit sound so damn pretty. Yeah, cause this unhinged comedy. And right now you're in the mix, so get ready, cause we bout to get it poppin'. And we ain't stopping.
Uneducated, unfiltered, unhinged. This the Mangina Dialogues. We at it again. Yeah, we at it again. Uneducated, unfiltered, unhinged.
Hello and welcome to the Mangina Dialogues. I am your host, Nick Scopes.
And I've never been more embarrassed on an episode to say that I am the Gregolicious.
And our guest today is the awesome Barry Katz. What's up, my man?
All right, I made the cut.
Yeah, I'd say so. I think your resume would prove you'd make the cut for sure.
So
I love that theme song. I really thought that, I was thinking to myself, what do I want more this morning, that theme song or Captain and Tennille? And I realized I wanted no Captain today.
Well, that's good news because that is part of your gift bag for being part of our show today. That and Manscaped, brought to you by our sponsor. So, Barry, I've listened to a whole bunch of your podcast, which is so awesome for aspiring comedians and comedian aficionados and just people that like entertainment. So one of those things... Industry standard, yes. You do these awesome intros for your guests. So I want to try to replicate one of those for you, which you'll recognize, but I think to most of our listeners and people that listen to our podcast who may not be familiar with you on a first name basis, they're going to get familiar real fast and then listen to your podcast. So are you ready for the big intro?
I'm ready. Yes, sir. Okay. I will. Let me sit down, put my feet up, get some popcorn, and it should last about 6 seconds.
Well, it may be 7 because I read slow. So Barry is an Emmy and Grammy nominated TV, film, record producer, podcast host, as mentioned, talent manager who is known for helping launch the careers of some of the most well-known comedy artists in the business, including Dave Chappelle, Nick Swardson, Louie CK, Bill Burr, Frank Caliendo, Brad Williams, Marc Maron, Whitney Cummings, Bill Bellamy, Wanda Sykes, Bert Kreischer, Jim Gaffigan, Dane Cook, Jeffrey Ross, Daryl Hammond, Jay Moore, Jim Breuer, and Tracy Morgan. Nick, you know any of those guys?
Never heard of any of them, no.
Besides that...
Never heard of them.
Yeah. Those people? No way.
No idea who those guys are.
Yeah.
Haven't seen or heard of any of them. He's also the man behind the NBC series Last Comic Standing. Barry, why are you on our podcast?
I will tell you why. Because you have a quality that is one of the most important qualities in our business or any business. Persistence. and you are persistent and you're passionate and you just keep going. You're like a pile driver. And if you can be like that in a way that's not annoying and is not intrusive and is, patient, you can normally get anything you want in this crazy business. And then, it's fun doing things like this because I'm from Longmeadow, Massachusetts, which is right on the Connecticut line between the Connecticut line and Springfield, where the Basketball Hall of Fame is. And you're doing something special in your area. And part of what the podcast is that I do in my spare time is about letting people know that anything is possible. I've seen everything happen. Everything. And, you can't even imagine that it will happen or that it can happen. But it will happen if you're persistent and your content is extraordinary. And if you can figure out a way to put those two together, you're always going to win.
Well, I very much appreciate you saying those things, because I've tried my entire life not to be annoying, and almost every girl I ever tried to go out with would say the opposite. So I wish I had that advice from when I was a younger person.
Well, the good news is I did not go to Sweden and finish the operation, so I'm a guy, so it worked for me.
Good news. Well, you haven't talked to Nick Scopoletti long enough. So, I mean, to that, so you grew up in Western Mass, and you went to college in Boston, right?
Boston University, yeah.
I actually did too, Northeastern. So I was reading a bunch of your testimonials on your website, and one in particular jumped out at me, and I'm curious as to sort of the origins of this. Can I read it to you? I'll just read you a piece of it. It was from who wrote this? Oh, I didn't write it down. You'll know who it was. It was, if you want an education on the entertainment industry, skip USC. Instead, get drunk and listen to Barry. So
what am I do today?
So the listen to Barry part is rather obvious, but what's the necessity to get drunk to do that? That jumped out at me. I'm like, why does advice get drunk and listen to Barry? Like, what is he trying to say?
Well, I think that was Steve Levitan, who created Modern Family, who was a great interview. That's a great, if you're a writer and you're listening, that's a great episode to listen to, because he creates this amazing analogy to make you understand how to write a comedy pilot, scripted pilot, and he compares it to a boat. And it's really incredible. And if I can find a piece of it, I will let you know, because it's really truly an incredible analogy that will help anybody who's a writer. But the reason why he said it, I mean, obviously he's just a comedy writer. I think he just wants to make people laugh. But I think that maybe it does help to get drunk and listen to me, although that would make my voice sound slower. So I encourage everybody listening at this point to put your podcast at 1 1/4 speed or 1 1/2 speed, and I think it'll be much better for you.
That's great. Very, so I listen to the podcast. I'm subscribed. I'm a listener. You sold me.
Thank you so much, man.
Yeah, it was really, it was great. I somehow, for some reason, when I was started listening, I found episode like 176. That's what came up, and it was Lisa Lampanelli. Like, I was scrolling through, it took me all the way back to that. I think it was an interview from 4 years ago. I was listening to that, and I've been lucky enough to talk to Lisa, and she's seen, our come to our club and seen my stand up and been nothing but complimentary, especially someone new like me. But I wanted to ask you about, how'd you get your start in this? Because I'm just starting out. I'm a year and a half in, and what led you down this road to become, Barry Katz, the industry standard?
Well, it's a long story. I'm going to try to give you the shortened version.
We got time. All good.
So what happens a lot of time, and your audience will relate to this, is that fate is a very strange, impactful part of all of our lives. It's interwoven in every single way. How you guys met, everything that happened. If you're married, who your partner is. It's an incredible thing, and sometimes it's positive fate that makes you go in the direction you're going personally or professionally, and sometimes it's negative fate. So in my case, when I was 4 years old, my father died of Hodgkin's disease. He was 37, and I'm 4, and my mom is raising myself and my sister alone. And you're a young person and you're privy to seeing your mother crying randomly at different times and not really trying to understand. She's trying to understand what happened, trying to know why her life took this path. And so when I was a young teenager, I started like exploring in the basement because, what happens is a lot of times somebody passes away and, you put things down there and you don't know where they are, or you just put them away and you forget about them. And I remember I pried open this old file cabinet and I opened up the drawer and there were all these musty albums in there. Now, it must have been 50 albums in there. Now, what significance this has is that, which was really strange, is that all but 3 of the albums were African American artists. Now, Longmeadow, Massachusetts is like an Indian word. It means Jewish white people live here. It's a white town, nothing there. But here I'm looking through Dinah Washington, Nat King Cole, Louis Armstrong, Diana Ross, Shirley Bassey, who sang Goldfinger, all these artists. And there's 3 albums with Caucasian people on the front, all comedy albums. One was Jonathan Winter's Comedy and Tragedy. One was the Smothers Brothers, who did musical comedy with the cover where he's smashing the guitar over his brother's head. And then The Button-Down Mind of Bob Newhart. So we don't have a record player. We don't have money. And back then, your older audience will know this, there were these things called S&H green stamps. So what happened was every time that you bought something in the grocery store, for every $1 you spent, they'd put 1 stamp in your bag, green stamp. And they gave you these books that you would paste the stamps into, and each book was worth $10 at a redemption store where they had like small appliances, different things. And I remember the record player was like, I think, 4 or 5 books. And I saved up, I did it, and I took a bus to the place and I bought a fold down record player. One of those that folds down, the speakers are on each side, and you carry it with a handle like a little suitcase. And I started playing the music, but I love music, but it just didn't speak to me as much, maybe because I had the rhythm of a furnace. I have no idea, but so I play the comedy albums. Jonathan Winters was a little crazy. Smothers Brothers was fun, musical comedy, but it wasn't really my thing. And then I played the Bob Newhart record, and it spoke to me, which is odd because his comedy isn't the kind of comedy that I really love per se, like, really crave. Because Bob Newhart, for those of you who don't know, and you look him up after the podcast, he did what I like to call dialogue humor. He would carry on a conversation with somebody, and he would pretend that they were there, but he didn't play them as a character. He did their voice the same way he did his voice. And the closest I could think that you've ever seen anything like it, if you've ever Googled Ellen DeGeneres' first Tonight Show, half of her set was a bit she used to do called Conversations with God. And if you watch that, you'll get a sense of the kind of humor it is, and if you watch Newhart stuff. So I memorized a bit of his famous bit called The Driving Instructor, and then I did it at a talent show, and 1,000 people, and it just destroyed the place. Like, Bob Newhart recorded in a room with 100 people. There's like low-level laughter. Like if you were to see a comic at your comedy club and they got laughs like Bob Newhart got, you'd say, this guy's not really doing that well. But back then, people were more reserved and they didn't laugh as hard. And to give you the backstory, and I know this is going long, but I know you and your audience will enjoy this. This is an incredible side note. So Bob Newhart was a comic who was not a stand-up comic. He was a go-to guy on variety shows on television. So Dean Martin or Bob Hope or whatever, they'd write a sketch and he'd come in and he'd deliver the lines with the sketch, and he'd be a straight man, but he also could be a great foil. Warner Brothers Records in 1959, early 1959, called him and said, "Hey, find a club, do some stand-up, record it, and give it to us. We want to release a comedy album with you." And he said, "I don't do stand-up comedy. I just do these dialogue things." They said, "Whatever, just record it, get a club, 100 people, just do it, send it to us, we'll release it." Make a long story longer on the side note, they release the album. He gets the call. He's got the #1 album on the Billboard charts, music or comedy, in the country. And his record becomes Warner Brother Records' first gold record in their history. And it was a comedy record. Anyway, so that's the sidebar. So then I go and I kill at the thing. I'm like, this is unbelievable. And so I didn't think anything of it. And I went to college at Boston University. And there was a blizzard in 1978. And this is where it all started. There's no one in Kenmore Square. There's nothing. It's a federal emergency. It's midnight a Saturday. I hear laughter. I look over, and ironically, the bar that is still there to this day is called Crossroads.
Yes, it is.
I open up the door. There's a stairway that goes up. I hear more laughter. And like a kid sneaking down with his parents, you go up the stairs and there's the banister, and I hold on to the banister with my head leveled to the floor, look through the people's feet. There's about 30 people there in a blizzard, and there's a guy on stage. He looks like Larry from the Three Stooges, a young version, and he's got a guitar and he's strumming it and he's singing this, "Rachel, my dear, oh how I miss her. Having sex with Rachel was amazing. It's like a concert. Frisbees would be flying around the room. Beach balls would hit me in the head. And every time Rachel wanted more, she'd light a match." Crowd laughed. He said thanks, walked off. The applause walks past me, down the stairs, out the door. I'm like, it's like a movie. I'm like, what just happened? I'm running down the stairs. I open the door like a movie, nowhere to be seen. Can't find them. Go back up to the bartender. I say, "Who was that? I've never seen a stand-up comic before. Who was that?" They said, "That's Stephen Wright."
Huh.
I said, "Wow. God, that's incredible. I love what happened there. Is there a place to perform here? Can you perform? Can new people perform?" She said, "Monday night, open mic. Come at 6 to sign up." So I sign up for the open mic night. I go down there, and it's packed. And the guy hosting is this like Bostonian huge guy. They call him the taxi driver, Ross Bickford. He's killing. I mean, he's destroying the place. He brings me up. He eviscerates me like you've seen hosts do at comedy clubs. He does this thing like, "Hey, this next guy is a really funny gay guy. I'm just kidding. He's not funny. And he sounds like a buffalo. Please welcome Barry Katz." And I'm like, oh my God. And I went up and I just did some joke like, "Listen, you shouldn't tell what we did last night," whatever. And I go on and I say, "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd love to do something that means a lot to me. I'd love to do an homage to Bob Newhart's greatest bit, the driving instructor, for you people." And here it is. And I start the bit and I finish the bit. And again, it's fucking killing, like harder than the album. Like I'm like, my God, this is there's something to this. I must have something that I'm doing here that's working. And like Stephen Wright, when it was over, I didn't know. Like I always was the kind of person who would shake hands with people, thank you, whatever. But I saw Stephen Wright, and I thought, well, I should just walk off stage and walk out the door. He just walked off stage, walk down the stairs out the door, and the taxi driver guy runs after me. And this is when I found out about comedy and the beginnings of comedy and the right and wrong of comedy. He says, "Kid, where'd you come from?" I said, "Well, I'm from Longmeadow. I'm going to Boston University." He says, "You got to come back next week, man. That was amazing. No one kills like that here." I said, "Oh, thank you so much. You did great too." He said, "Listen, do you mind if I give you some advice?" I said, "No, what is it?" He said, "Listen, when you're doing somebody else's bit, don't mention their name. Just take the fucking bit, okay? I do it all the time. Do you see my bits up there? I'm killing. I didn't write one of those fucking jokes." And I just look at him like a dog looks at the answering machine, and I slumped back to my dorm room and started writing original jokes, and that's how I started doing stand-up comedy.
That's an insane story.
That's
so
wild.
funny.
Greg, have you been to that bar as well?
Of course.
Yeah, that's what I figured.
Of course. It's a standard. So how did you go from that to being, I mean, obviously, your resume is ridiculous. I don't even know where to start, but how do you go from that to then representing and managing and guiding some of the biggest people in the comedy business of all time? Certainly the last 20 years, 15 years.
Again, it's very fateful, because I was doing the open mics and I was doing really well. Back then you'd do an open mic and there'd be like the greatest comics in Boston would come by for stage time. So you had Stephen Wright and Paula Poundstone and Bobcat Goldthwait and who started there, Rosie O'Donnell, and then the great Boston comics legends everybody's heard of, like Steve Sweeney and Don Gavin and DJ Hazard and Jack Gallagher and Barry Crimmins, the late Barry Crimmins. And they put the open micers on in between those people.
Right.
So you'd have to follow like the greatest acts in town, and you'd have to hold your own. And I did. I always did. And this guy who was a great, great stand-up comic, Chance Langton, saw me, and he was running a comedy club in town called Play It Again Sam's,
Yep.
which was a movie bar before video. The movie bar was upstairs. They had a restaurant bar where a singer sang, and downstairs was the comedy club.
Some of the best chicken wings in Boston.
There you go. And he said, "Listen, I like you. You're funny. I'd love you to be the doorman at my comedy club. I do it Friday and Saturdays. I'll pay you $10 a night, and I'll let you go on for 5 minutes. It's 5 minutes of 2 a.m. after 4 headliners and do your set." I said, "Great. I'll do it." And I started doing that, and obviously very difficult going on as the doorman at 1:55 a.m. But I enjoyed it. I had a great time, and the owner of the place fired Chance, and he came to me and he said, "Listen, I'm firing him. I want you to take over." I'm like, "Listen, I'm in college. He said, "Listen, I believe in you. I see how you are with the comics. They all like you. And you're so much younger than all of them, but they all respond to you, and I want you to take over." And I said, "Well, I'll give you cash, whatever you need, just do it." I said, "Why don't you want to take over?" He said, "Listen, I don't want it. You take the door, I'll take the bar. I don't want to deal with these guys." I said, "Why not?" He said, "I'll tell you why I don't want to deal with comedians. I like movies." I hope I remember this. He said, "There's 3 reasons. Movies don't talk back to me. They don't show up late, and they never ask me for a raise." And so I took over, and I made Bob Goldthwait my host on Wednesday, Dennis Leary on Thursday. Friday was DJ Hazard, a local great comedian. Saturday, Lenny Clark. I made a deal for $1,000. I called Lenny Clark. I'm a young kid. I said, "Listen, I want you every Saturday night at the club." He laughed at me. He said, "Listen, Barry, it's not going to happen. You're not gonna, you don't have the money to pay me. I said, what do you get at the other club? He said, 500. I said, I'll give you 1,000 for 3 shows. He said, what are you, crazy? You can't pay me 1,000. I said, I don't care. I don't care what happens. I want you there. Show me who you're with, and I'll show you who you are. I want you at the club. And he took the deal for 1,000. Imagine paying somebody $1,000 on one night in a local basement comedy club that holds 150 people in 1985 or whatever it was, or 3 or whatever year it was. And but he did it. And then I had Anthony Clark on Sundays, who was from Yes Dear and many things, and in between sprinkled Jonathan Katz, who created Dr. Katz, and Paula Poundstone, and all these other people, and Dana Gould, and who took over for Dennis Leary when he went to New York. So it was a great time, and then I just started. I started booking shows all over New England and colleges, and I would take my car and go out, and I made brochures, and I sold these $500 comedy shows to one-nighters to clubs during the boom all across New England, and I had like 50 one-nighters and comedy clubs all over the place, from as far away as Burlington, Vermont, and Bangor, Maine, to Tanglewood and Springfield, and I did shows in near Westport, Connecticut. I did things in Rhode Island, and so it was an incredible time. And then we started doing Stitches. We started booking Stitches, and also Play It Again Sam's, and it was just incredible. And that's how I started on that light. And then, if you're asking me how I got to the next point, another fateful thing that happened, again, a negative fateful thing. I got married, and my wife, who was 23 at the time, died. So, you can just imagine what happens when somebody blows a hole through you, or the world blows a hole through you. And it was this negative, positive thing that made me make a change, and I'll explain. So when something bad happens to you, you go out in the world and people come up to you and they're nice. Hey, how you doing? You okay? They hug you. Hey, listen, anything I can do for you, anything you want. And it's wonderful, but everywhere you go in your community, it happens over and over again. It's just a reminder over and over again of what happened. And so one day, I just got in my car and I informed the person that was helping me to book the things, and I drove to New York. Now, I know this sounds odd because normally it's important to have a plan. But my plan in driving to New York was, I'm going to drive to New York and I'm going to get an apartment and I'm going to figure things out. I want to start here. My mother always told me that Frank Sinatra song, if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere.
Truth.
So I got off at the 79th Street Boat Basin exit, drove as far as I could to where you couldn't go anymore, like I think it was Broadway where it turned, and I parked my car and went into this restaurant and bar. I sat at the end of the bar. There was a payphone and a Yellow Pages. I opened it up to real estate agents. I called them. I left the number of the payphone. The first guy who called me, the first apartment he showed me was at 82 West 82nd Street near Central Park West. And it was a 4th floor studio apartment with a loft. It was $935. I gave him, I believe I gave him $2,805 in cash.
Wow.
And I signed the lease, and I'm in New York City. I have no furniture. I have nothing, but I'm in New York City, and I'm living in New York City, and I'm determined to make it. but I don't have a phone. I don't have, I'm working on pay phones. I remember on Monday I called a company called Spotlight, which was the #1 booking agency in the world for comics. They represented Leno and all the big comics. And I called them because I knew of them, and I said, "Can I meet with them?" And they offered to hire me as an agent. I didn't want to be an agent working there. They said, "Well, why are you here?" I said, "I don't know, but I want to be part of it."
Right.
And they said, "Well, we have a small office you can rent if you want." And there was a small office at 57th and Broadway. It was literally would hold a small desk, a chair by the side, and my chair, with a big window overlooking Broadway and 57th Street. And I said, "Well, how much is this office to rent?" They said $600 a month. Now, again, if you can visualize how small this office was, it was probably 4 feet by 6.5 feet, maybe 7 feet. And so, I negotiated with them, and they would not budge. They would not budge at all. It was crazy. And so I made a decision. I just said, "Listen, is $3,900 extra, that extra 300, is that $3,900 going to be the reason why I don't make this move? Am I going to worry about that money, or am I going to figure out a way to make that money back by being around the greatest people in the world?" And so I did that. That's my dog drinking water. I'm sorry about that. And so I went ahead and I made the move, and I decided I wanted to be a manager, because I had seen Dennis Leary's manager, a guy named Jason Solomon, come to Boston, and I saw that he was really doing it. And I thought, I'd like to do this. And so, but I figured I needed a platform. And fortuitously, a friend of mine from the Boston area, Eddie Brill, who used to book the Letterman show, told me he was leaving his club in Greenwich Village and going to LA to try to make it. And he said, "You should talk to the owners." And so, to make a long story even longer, I talked to the owners, but they told me a guy named Rick Messina and Tony Camacho were booking the club now. And Tony Camacho and Rick Messina were doing what I was doing in New York. Tony still does it. Rick Messina now manages Tim Allen and Drew Carey, among other people. He went out of business. He didn't want to do it anymore after 8 weeks. And I went to the owner. I said, "Listen, I'd like to turn this into the Boston Comedy Club in New York City." And they looked at me like I was crazy. And if you watch Mark Twain Awards, two people who started my club, Chappelle and Sarah Silverman. Sarah says, what some crack addict named this club. But I wanted to feature Boston comedians, and I wanted to feature Boston memorabilia in there, but also New York comics. And so I decided that I really wanted to manage people then. And it was around 1987, 88. And so I went back to Boston. I took meetings with about 10 different comedians, in New York and in Boston. And they all said yes, except for one, Marc Maron. He said no. But I still love Marc. I actually did a lot of stuff with him, and I used to get a lot of people, a lot of things, even if I didn't manage them. And so it all happened that way. So I met Jay Moore in New York, started representing him as a teenager, met Jeff Ross in New York, but I also met Louie CK, who was my first client ever, manager client ever in Boston. He was 18 years old. And unbelievably, he came to New York. He helped me set up the lights, the sound, and he was the first person on stage at the Boston Comedy Club.
Wow.
And throughout the time there, that's where, I met Chappelle, who came to the club and on an open mic night, and I literally shook his hand and I said, "I want to represent you." I'd never even seen him perform before, but it was like this feeling like the movie The Dead Zone, where I just could see the future. And And before I knew it, Anthony Clark was doing sitcoms in LA, and I had 4 people on Saturday Night Live, and Chappelle was, doing pilot after pilot and movie after movie, and it was like it was an amazing time where anything that I worked on, I was fortunate enough that for some reason my eye for who I thought was going to cross over into all areas of business and make a living with my talent and theirs was becoming fortuitous. And even people that I didn't represent, who either I didn't pull the trigger to represent or they didn't necessarily want me to represent them, or any faction thereof, people like, Dave Attell or Patrice O'Neill or, people like that, I would still be booking them at colleges and clubs all across the country. I would still, when I had showcases, I used to make deals with television networks and bookers. Fly out. The guy who booked the evening at the Improv, fly you out. I'll put you up in a nice hotel. All you have to do is watch comedy on Friday and Saturdays. And then they would book like 15 people for evening at the Improv or things like that. So people's first television sets, like people like Attell or people like Marc Maron or Patrice O'Neill, a lot of them were opportunities that I created to help launch their career, even when I didn't necessarily represent them. Sarah Silverman, gave her first stage time. She worked at the club all the time. I loved her. She's a great person, funny. So there's people that I help get started that is the least amount, like I'd say like Sarah, where the thing that I provided the most was just stage time support and, some auditions on stage for certain television shows. And then there's other people like, Chappelle, where when I started working with him, he did 41 late night national television comedy spots, a special, $400 million movies, 7 development deals. And there's other people that I obviously worked with a little more. People like Jim Norton, who I started working with, and I was working with him when he, booked the Opie and Anthony show. And we all know what happened, from there. And so I love my relationship with a lot of these people. Gaffigan, Jim Gaffigan, the Letterman show was the first big break for him, and after that it all snowballed, and I was a producer on his first sitcom he ever did, which was produced by Letterman's company. It's called Mr. New York. So there's so many things that have happened, and that's how I got in. And when you're a manager and you're managing great people, then you can become an executive producer on television projects or a producer on film projects.
Right.
And you can align yourself with that. And so then, I started going to LA and back and forth, and that's how it all started.
How long have you been living in LA now?
I've been here probably, I I came here really more full time in 1995. And the reason being is because there was a year in 94 where I didn't get anybody into the Montreal Just for Laughs Festival. And I was kind of depressed about it. And I called up a comedy club that I knew, the Comedy Nest. And I said, listen, if I bring 18 comedians up there from the States, will you give me Friday, Saturday, and Sunday? And I'll bring industry people in. And unbelievably, he said yes. And so I brought all my artists up there that I work with, from Daryl Hammond to Jim Breuer, Tracy Morgan, everybody you can imagine, and had 6 of them on each night, and was faxing to every industry person, put ads in Variety and Hollywood Reporter, because back then there wasn't internet, there wasn't texting, so all night long I'd be faxing people and inviting people and calling them, and I had over 250 industry people who came to those shows, and I got 6 development deals for my artists, 5 or 6, I can't remember, and nobody else got one from Montreal that year. And I had called my show New Faces, which is something where I actually started New Faces in Montreal, but I did it one time because they didn't want me to do it anymore, and so I didn't do it anymore. So I got a development deal from Disney for 4 years, an executive producer deal. And so in 1995, they had me come out and gave me offices, and that's when I really started coming to LA full time.
Wow. So I mean, just hearing you talk about all these people and everyone you've worked with and even helped that you didn't work with, is there anyone that you wish you had the opportunity to work with that either turned you down or you just wanted to work with and couldn't find the right project or opportunity to work with them?
The one person who I always wanted to work with, who was already managed, who I loved, was a guy from Albany, New York, Jimmy Fallon.
Who?
I always loved
who?
Jimmy.
Jimmy who?
I always loved Jimmy. He was a great musical impressionist, and I always loved impressionists, and I was always great with impressionists. You know, Jay Moore started with impressions. Melissa Villaseñor on SNL, I represented for 8 years, and she tested for SNL twice when I worked with her, but she didn't get it. But the third time was a charm, and I'm really proud of her. I represented Daryl Hammond, who I actually wrote his test for SNL with him. He says I wrote the whole thing, and I found out 24 hours before his test that he could do a Ted Koppel impression. And so I created a whole test around the Ted Koppel Nightline.
Wow.
And when he got the show, the first episode of his year, his first show, the cold open, was Ted Koppel Nightline. So that was a really wonderful moment. So Jimmy Fallon, somebody who I loved and I wanted to represent. He was represented at the time by a girl named Randy Siegel. And then the person that I had said no to, that probably I should not have said no to 20 years ago, was Kevin Hart. Kevin used to come around the club and used to go on all the time, and he was a great energy, amazing. He was sleeping on Keith Robinson's couch, and just a really wonderful energy, powerful, but you know, the material wasn't there, and he always told me he was ready, and I should represent him, and I just said, just be patient, you know, just be patient, just put the work in, and I'd be honored to represent you, but you're not there yet. He said, I am there, I am ready. And before I knew it, he just moved to LA, and he proved that he was ready. He just started booking acting jobs left and right. And, you know, and this is the weird part about the business sometimes. Like, you think that, you know, people are going to feel a certain way about you when you made certain decisions. And on the podcast, the Industry Standard podcast, I've been doing it for 5 years, and I realized I never asked them to be interviewed.
Right.
And if you look on the internet and you look on podcasts, you'll see that he doesn't do a lot of interviews on podcasts. You know, he just never really did that many.
Right.
And I was in Montreal one year when he was there, and I just saw him in passing. I didn't say, I was like from 20 yards away or whatever, and I thought, you know, maybe I should reach out to him, ask him what's the worst that can happen. He could say no. And I just asked him, and like 5 minutes later, I get a text back. Of course, whatever time you want, how much time do you need? 2 hours? I'm there. And it was one of the greatest times and interviews that I had, and I was really honored. And you know, you think people feel certain ways about you sometimes, but you realize that some things are all in your head, and your audience, that's one of the lessons you learn about not just our business, but any business, is that, we tend to create these stories in our head about how things aren't going to be the way they're supposed to be. And before we actually create stories in our head about how things are going to be.
Yeah. I mean,
Barry, you've clearly done so much. Like, what's next for you, man? Like, what do you work? I know you have the podcast, but like, is there anything we don't know about that you want to tell people about?
Well, I love, again, I love being a manager. I love producing television shows. I'm working on, a number of different shows that are about to, knock on wood, go. A documentary film I'm working on. I was fortunate enough, the last documentary film I did was with Tom Hanks and Amy Schumer and Larry David and so many other comics, called Misery Loves Comedy, and which got into the Sundance Film Festival and was bought by Tribeca. I was really happy about that. But I think the things that I'm working on now, what I love is trying to figure out things that are different and unique, and I'm always attracted to that. Like when I worked with Dane Cook, I'll never forget him saying that he was going to create a noise that's so loud that Hollywood would have to listen. And to start with him with social media, when no artist ever worked on social media, and to be able to do that with him, where he could press a button and sell out Madison Square Garden and Boston Garden without an advertising in a newspaper or a radio ad or anything. So I'm always looking for things to work on. I love working on different things. I love consulting with companies or comedians who need help that I can't manage, but I can help get to the next level. I love working with different initiatives. Like I'm working now on a premium subscription-based network platforms for African American and Latino artists, because that market, believe it or not, it's not, for some reason, people haven't moved forward as much as that as on other markets. I love working on stuff to help people, so I'm working on like this, almost like a master class 5.0 that's like a monthly thing that comedy artists or people in the entertainment business can, pay a certain amount of money per month, and they can listen to great pinpointed advice from the greatest people in the business, as well as myself adding to things to help them with different things that they need help with, whether it be how do I shoot my own special independently, how do I create my own sitcom and shoot it and put it up and get it sold, how do I start and get a late night television set as a comic, how do I build the set, how do I map out the material. So there's how do I start a podcast that can be successful, how do I create a social networking platform that's going to take me where I need to go. There's so many things that I love helping people as I'm working on that. I couldn't even begin to tell you all the things, because that's what keeps me happy, is the variety of the business and how to tell a story in a unique and different way. And your audience would be the first to know this, is that everything that works in the entertainment business involves a story.
Right.
A great story. And if you have a great story or stories, you're going to go far. It doesn't matter, even if it's something that looks like a B movie, like Tiger King. If you watch it, you're truly watching something that's like something that you would think would be, as Kathy Griffin would say, life on the D list.
Yeah.
But you're watching a car accident and a story unfold. And I say car accident, I'm just making an analogy, but that's the way it is. And with stand up, and Nick would, let's say your stand up, you're going to get where you want to go if your stories are extraordinary. Now, you're saying, Rodney Dangerfield tell a story, told 5-second jokes. But those 5-second jokes told a story. My parents didn't like me. My bath boys were a toaster and a radio. Well, that's a story. It tells you what his relationship was with his parents. Or, my wife, she's a bad, but I don't think we blow Chappelle in the dark. Clive chipped in to build a new screen door. He's telling you about a story about how his wife is a bad book and the results of it. Or infidelity. I went to a bar. The bartender surprised me. He pulled out a picture of my wife. Story. Okay, he goes to a bar to drink. And then he finds out that his wife is cheating on him. These are all stories, but that's 5 seconds. Chappelle, the crack baby story. That's like a 4-minute bit, where he's driving through South Central, babies in diapers selling crack. But it's a story. Bert Kreischer, Machine. This is a 15-minute story about him, going to Russia and getting mixed up with the mob. Bo Burnham might write songs in his bedroom to start off and launch his career. But these songs were little stories. And then he switches it up and writes a movie, 8th Grade, or I think it's called 8th Grade. Again, a story. And everybody who gets where they want to go, or every movie or television project, it's all about the story. Manifest. Plane goes up, missing for 5 years, lands. That's all you need to know. That's the story. And then everything weaves together with it. And I think that's the important thing that I look at and I take about what we're doing in the entertainment business and what people need to do to get to the next level. The more extraordinary your stories are, the more unique your stories are, the more original they are, and in comedy, the funnier they are, the farther you're going to go. You can't possibly lose. Think about music that's so tough for those listeners that are musicians. There's thousands and thousands of musicians, and you could be a singer in Peoria, Illinois, and you could be standing ovations every night. And sadly, you might not make it because there's 1,000 other motherfuckers getting standing ovations all over the world. I mean, every music show, you think to yourself, God, we're really going to find somebody new. And then Grace Vanderwall pops up, 13 years old, playing a ukulele and wins the show. It's like, but in comedy, think about it. And I'm going to pose this question to you and your audience. How many geniuses are there? How many geniuses are there in music right now that you would say, living, these people are prolific and geniuses? Even if your list is short, it's going to have 20 people on it or 25 people on it. Okay? If I ask you right now, I want you to tell me all the comedians, when you look at their body of work and you look at everything, they're a genius. How many are there? Honestly, think about it. I mean, if there's 5, it's a miracle. Maybe 3.
Yeah.
And, Chappelle after Sticks and Stones, and I managed Chappelle for 8.5 years. And, if you can watch Sticks and Stones and you watch all the prior stuff and you can tell me that Dave Chappelle isn't creeping on top of the Mount Rushmore of comedy past prior, let me know. But it's incredible what he's doing. And this is a guy who doesn't write anything down. This is a guy that has no documentation, doesn't record anything. This is a guy, he has it all in his head and goes on stage and kills it. This is a guy who has no social media but could sell out Madison Square Garden in a minute. Think of how great you have to be and your stories have to be to get to the point where you're doing that, where you're like that much of a legend, where you can sell out anywhere without anybody. Christ, Houdini had to go to a town and hang on the back of a crane 1,000 feet up, yelling to the town, saying, "I'm doing a show here next Tuesday. Get tickets." But the point I'm trying to make is that there's very few geniuses in comedy. So, you have to, to get to, you don't have to be a genius to make it, but you have to aspire to do work that's that great. So when you're doing your set and your important set and people are there watching, or it's a big crowd and it's really, you want to get the word out about what you're doing, it's better to aspire to the kind of comedy that Jim Jeffries does in his gun control bit, and you can look that up, than, Dustin Diamond doing his stand-up routine. You're going to be, you want to look at what other people are doing and really make it work. When I did a documentary on Houdini, and when I interviewed David Copperfield, he said to me something really fascinating. He said, "Listen, we all stand on the shoulders of Houdini. He broke down the barriers and let us know what greatness really was. And we try to aspire to be at that level of greatness, what he created, the water torture, the milk can, all these different things. And I know it's magic and I know it's illusion, but it's the same thing. David Copperfield has been number one for 35 years. 35 years. How do you get to be number? Think about that. Do you know anyone in any profession that's number one for 35 years?
No.
How great do you have to be able to do that? It's not about getting there. Again, you've heard this before. It's about staying there.
Staying there.
And so, for any comic listening, just look at the examples of the greatness out there and work towards your material being that great. And I can guarantee you, if you're doing great stuff, you will make it. You can't fail. A comedian could be doing a great routine in a bathroom in Guam. And if it gets on YouTube and somebody sees it, I can guarantee you, if they're doing the material of the level of Chappelle or Chris Rock or Jim Jeffries, I can guarantee you that they're going to make
it. That is 100%. That's 1,000% true.
Yeah.
And it's incredible. I wrote down all of these questions that I wanted to ask you, and you answered every single one of them in the in everything. It's amazing, unbelievably amazing.
I'm sorry. My interview turned into 3 questions and hours of answers.
No way. That was absolutely
got it all answered.
I mean, I'm sitting here in awe, to be totally honest. It's really unbelievable. And my pages are all scratched out. Like, got that one. But I think the last thing that we will ask, and then we'll have to do a second parter of this at some point in the future because there's so much. It's amazing. So
be an honor.
You obviously looking on the internet or in places to find people's client rosters, it's hardly, it's not ever really that accurate and stuff, but looking through what I was able to find on yours, it seems like you keep a very short, tight roster of people you're actually managing. Is that on purpose? Is that how you always done it? Because it sounds like everything we've talked about, there's been, I mean, it's a who's who of the comedy world. But looking at it now,
I don't. I haven't always done it that way. There've been times where I represented 40 people in the beginning, but I think that because I really love doing a lot of different things, and I don't want to ever do a bad job. I want to be great at what I do, and I've had all different incarnations because management is like a comedy career. It's like you look at Chappelle and the beginning and you're like, wow, this guy's taken off, and then he disappears after Blue Streak for 6 years, and then he comes back with Chappelle Show. He's as hot as ever, and then he disappears for 4 more years of not really doing anything, 5 years, and he comes back again stronger than ever. So it's like it's impossible to think that like every musician's album is going to be equal or better to the next,
right,
or every comedian's hour special is going to be better than the next, or every Seinfeld episode is going to be better than the next. And so in any profession, especially entertainment and comedy, it's just about riding the waves. And,
right,
sometimes you're going to ride the waves and your artists are going to be like killing it. And then I remember when I was managing, this was a funny moment, and I never think of the business, and I never thought of money. I never cared about the money. I always thought, I'm going to, if I do well, I do what I'm do it well, I'm going to make money. But I remember Dane, we did this tour, the first tour, and literally I think he made with merch and sales in 7 weeks, I think he made $30 million. So as a manager, you're getting a check for $3 million for the 7 weeks or whatever it is.
right.
So that's just one client, and and I'll never forget. We always used to have these meetings at the beginning of the year about strategy. He would like to have them. Every artist is different how they want to do things. And he sat down and he said, Katsy, this is my strategy this year. I don't want to fucking do anything. I'm just going to work out at the clubs locally here in LA. And for the whole year, I'm just going to work on building my hour up. I don't want to take any dates on the road. I don't want to do anything. I just want to work locally. I don't care about any film or television right now. Just want to do that. I remember him leaving the meeting, and I'm like, okay, this year's going to be a little light.
Well, I can tell you.
And so,
no, go ahead.
Yeah.
Finish. No, finish.
So that's so it's just like that's just the funny part about it. It's like if you're just thinking about the money or whatever it is, it's just because anything can happen the way it's supposed to happen. It's the weirdest thing. Like you'll have a client who'll be doing nothing, and then they'll book like a role in a sitcom, and then they're rolling in money,
Yeah.
and then other people who go out on auditions and they test and they don't get it, and then somebody else gets it and they make money. So you can't worry about that. You just got to worry about doing great work.
Yeah.
And so for management, that's when keeping it tight or keeping 10 clients now or whatever it is. I just want to work with good people and people who have a chance to do great things. Like somebody like Brad Williams, who's I love, who's 4'4", I guess pound for pound, the funniest comedian in the world probably. But it's fun, like working with somebody like that who is disabled and is selling out everywhere and killing it and doing all these specials. And I've got 2 television shows I'm developing with him right now that are sold, and
awesome.
We're waiting to see what happens after this thing. So that's exciting to do something that's never been done before with somebody who, has a disability but doesn't even acknowledge probably the disability or doesn't care. And or somebody like Ben Glebe, who ran for president this year, and had a campaign and was doing debates and things and going to New Hampshire, and granted, it didn't work out the way he wanted to, but he made a bold choice and he did something different. And then a year before that, we created Telethon for America. Actually, he created it and I helped him produce it. And it was an idea to get people out and vote and on the internet and like do this thing that aired all over. And from 12 weeks away of having no money, no bookings, but, seeing that an artist was passionate about something, getting people out to vote, and you get your first artist to commit, Chelsea Handler, then you get Jane Fonda, then you get Natalie Portman, then you get Charlize Theron, and Jim Jeffries, Ray Romano, Dr. Phil, Whitney Cummings, and then all of a sudden, like, we have like 40 huge stars. We get the money. Michelle Obama's company comes on.
Wow.
And we do this Telethon for America, which kills it. And again, Ben Glebe is a guy I've known since he used to reach out to me when he was in college to help him book people. Yes, he has a show on Netflix called Idiot Test where he's hosted 200 episodes of the show. But that doesn't mean he's where he wants to be.
Right.
That doesn't mean he is getting to the place that he feels he should be. But it's always fun when you're working with artists that have unique ideas, different takes, want to do original things. And I love helping people do that. And sometimes you're successful at it, and sometimes you're not. But I always love working with people who have great ideas and are ambitious.
Well, I mean, you can just tell by hearing you talk about all the people that you've worked with that they're much more than just a name on a piece of paper or a paycheck at the end of the road. Like, and I've worked with a lot of agents and managers in different capacities through the years, and a lot of times it always seems like that. But listening to you talk about these people, it's more like you talk about them like they're your kids, and it's really interesting and very cool to hear.
I just, it's I stress this more than anything else. I know it's hard to think in these terms, but, money is wonderful, and money helps you do the things that you want to do. But in the end, you gotta work for what you believe in. And if any young person was listening, they told me, look, I can take a job at Goldman Sachs for $100,000 a year. I don't really want to do that. Or I can intern for Judd Apatow for free for the next 4 months. And I want to be in the entertainment business. Well, fucking get your ass on a plane and intern for Judd Apatow.
Yeah, 100%.
Listen, I can take this job at ABC working in the sales division and get my foot in the door of the network, or I can get this page job at Saturday Night Live where I'm helping people seat at Saturday Night Live for minimum wage. Get your fucking ass to Saturday Night Live.
Yeah, amen.
And fucking sleep on somebody's couch.
Yeah.
Just get in. When I interviewed Larry King, one of the greatest things he said is when he wanted to do radio, he took this shitty job at a radio station. He was like cleaning toilets and getting coffee. But he said something very profound. He said, one day somebody gets sick. One day somebody doesn't show up. One day somebody gets fired. And when you're in, you're in.
Yeah. It's amazing.
And that's what happened to him. And that's what always happens. There's always an opening. Look, Kevin Hart, hard worker, tremendous. But if Kevin Hart were sitting here next to me, he would admit to one thing. Who was the hottest African American actor and comedian right before he broke? Cat Williams.
Yeah.
Cat Williams doing tons of movies, selling out stand-up shows. Cat Williams, for some reason, self-destructs a little bit. Studios aren't that willing to deal with him. Comedy places aren't willing to deal with him. He isn't getting the specials because he's, having issues. Who steps in? Kevin Hart. And that's the way it works. There's opportunities for everybody.
Yeah.
And you can find them and you can get them, but you have to be ready. So now's the time, like somebody like Nick, you're training for that day when somebody doesn't show up and you're on a show somewhere and there's 300 people in the crowd and there's an opener, a middle, and the headliner, and the call comes in, hey, the headliner, his car broke down. He fucked up. He didn't know the date. What are we going to do? Don't worry, I got a cover. I'll do an hour, and then I'll do an encore. You're training for that day so that when you go on that day and that guy doesn't show up, no one gives a fuck because they just saw Nick get a standing ovation, and people shaking his hand and hugging him with their masks on and their gloves at the end of the show.
Well, on that note, I think
that was good. The mask and the gloves got me.
Mask and the gloves is the best way we can end this one. This was honestly, Barry, my favorite of the 40 some odd ones we've done so far.
I bet you say that to all the lesbians.
No, I don't. We're going to put this out as our 50th episode next week.
Yeah.
It's obviously a monumental place for us to be, having hit 50 and then having 50 be with someone like yourself in talking about comedy with us two weirdos from, I was going to say Long Island, but Connecticut is really a highlight for us. I'm speaking for Nick, but truly thank you very, very much. And we absolutely look forward.
It was such a pleasure. I'm so grateful to both of you, and good luck to you guys. And keep up the great work and keep raising the bar.
Thanks, Barry. We'll absolutely talk to you soon.
Appreciate you. Thank you so much, man.
Stay safe and health and happiness to all your kids and wives and people around you.
You too. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Uneducated,